Imagine you are a Genoese crossbowman. It is the 26th of August, 1346. You are standing on the dusty fields outside Crécy in northern France. Your body is screaming in protest. You have just marched 6 grueling leagues on foot, fully clad in heavy iron armor, under the suffocating, relentless summer heat. Exhausted, dehydrated, and desperately thirsty, you are not given a moment to rest. Instead, you're being roughly shoved forward toward the front line. The arrogant, impatient French knights mounted on war horses at your back, shouting demands for you to advance. Your weapon is a masterpiece of medieval technology, a powerful crossbow with a steel prod, a true war machine, capable of punching a heavy steel bolt clean through thick chainmail at long range. But as you drag your feet up the gentle slope toward the waiting English army, you do not feel the confidence of a deadly marksman. You feel a cold, gnawing dread. Because today, in the sheer chaos of the French army's rushing, disorganized advance, baggage wagons could not keep up. Your pavises, the massive wooden shields that are as much a fundamental part of your deadly trade, the crossbow itself, are still miles behind you, stuck somewhere in the muddy baggage train. You are stepping onto a battlefield completely naked, stripped of your only defense, and across that open, grassy field, 1,000 English longbowmen are already stepping into formation, silently knocking their deadly yard-long arrows to their bows. What followed next at the Battle of Crécy was one of the most famous catastrophes in medieval history. But to truly understand why the simple absence of those wooden shields was so devastatingly fatal, you first have to understand what a pavise actually was. It was not merely a piece of auxiliary equipment. It was the entire tactical logic of medieval crossbow warfare, made solid in wood and leather. The crossbow was indisputably one of the most formidable and feared ranged weapons. The High Middle Ages and the early Renaissance. From roughly the 12th century onward, military-grade crossbows became the premier ranged weapon of choice for professional armies across Europe. They possessed immense benefits. They were lethally powerful at distance. They were mechanically consistent in their trajectory, and they required far less physical conditioning to operate than the demanding English longbow. While it took a lifetime of intense physical deformation to master the longbow, an ordinary peasant could be trained to use a crossbow effectively in mere days. However, the crossbow suffered from a fundamental critical tactical flaw, a vulnerability baked directly into its physical design. The more powerful the weapon became, the longer and more grueling it was to reload. Heavy military crossbows, like the ones carried into battle by professional elite mercenaries, like the Genoese, required massive mechanical spanning devices to draw the thick steel bowstring back, against immense draw weights that could reach hundreds of pounds. This was not a quick process. A windlass, a complex system of pulleys, cords, and a hand-cranked ratchet winder attached to the wooden stock, could take so long to operate that it allowed for perhaps only a single shot per minute. Even lighter, alternative spanning methods like the belt claw or the stirrup required many long, agonizing seconds of focused, bent-over, two-handed physical labor. During every single one of those seconds spent reloading, the crossbowman was completely helpless. He could not hold his weapon ready. He could not scan the horizon for incoming threats, and he could not run without abandoning the spanning process entirely. In the bluntest terms, he was a sitting duck. By the time the Genoese crossbowmen had risen to become the most sought-after mercenary ranged force, all of medieval Europe, the Pavise had become completely inseparable from their deadly craft. These men were not mere archers or untrained peasants drafted into service. They were highly paid elite technicians, professional military contractors, who had systematically refined the crossbow system into something that could utterly dominate a late medieval battlefield when properly deployed. They had been fighting in the bloodiest conflicts of Europe since the Crusades, hired by desperate kings, wealthy dukes, and powerful city-states across the continent for their highly disciplined, devastating firepower. Their reputation on the field was so formidable and so deeply feared that Emperor Frederick II, furious after suffering a crushing defeat at the Siege of Parma in which Genoese crossbowmen played a decisive, lethal role, reportedly ordered that any captured Genoese crossbowmen have their fingers brutally amputated so they could never draw a bowstring again. When the Genoese were properly equipped and deployed according to their doctrine, Pavise was central to how they fought and survived. In major engagements, larger versions of these protective screens were used, wide enough to shelter more than one man at a time. Historical accounts suggest that these professional crossbowmen were often accompanied by dedicated attendants or shield bearers. These secondary troops managed the heavy wooden cover, adjusting the props, and shifting the barriers forward, while the marksmen concentrated entirely on the mechanical operation of their weapons. The tactical doctrine was beautifully coherent and highly effective. Move systematically within range, plant the massive wooden shields firmly into the earth. Engage the enemy with devastating armor-piercing volleys. Duck behind the impenetrable barrier to reload and repeat. It was not glamorous or chivalric warfare. It was systematic, cold, and almost industrial. And when it worked, it was absolutely devastating. Which brings us back to the fields of Crécy and to the sheer horror of the missing baggage wagons. The French advance toward the English lines had been so rushed, so chaotic, and so utterly disorganized that the slow-moving carts carrying the vital Genoese shield and their reserve ammunition were still miles away, stuck on the muddy roads when King Philip VI impatiently ordered his crossbowmen forward into the fray. The veteran Genoese commanders, who bitterly complained about being forced to advance without their pavises, were not showing cowardice. They were describing a fatal, professional crisis. Without those heavy wooden walls, they had absolutely no cover during their long, agonizing reload phases. Every single time they bent over their complex spanning devices to crank the steel strings back, they were completely exposed, stationary targets. Then, to compound the impending disaster, a sudden, violent summer rainstorm burst directly over the battlefield. The English longbowmen, seasoned by years of disciplined training, had the presence of mind to quickly remove their bowstrings and protect them from the moisture by keeping them dry under their caps. The Genoese crossbows, however, were complex mechanical instruments. Their thick, heavy strings could not be easily unstrung without specialized workshop tools. Under the pouring rain, the hemp strings became thoroughly soaked and stretched out of shape, lulling their tension. When the storm passed and the Genoese finally raised their weapons to fire, their already limited volleys were weak, ineffective, and fell short of the enemy lines. To make matters worse, as the dark storm clouds cleared, late afternoon sun emerged, shining directly into the eyes of the advancing Genoese, while the English stood with the sun at their backs, bathing their targets in perfect light. The storm of English longbow fire that followed was catastrophic. The Genoese, unable to reload safely, unable to find a single inch of cover on the open slope, and with their expensive weapons severely compromised by the rain, began to fall back in desperation. But the French knights riding behind them, imbued with a deep aristocratic contempt for infantry and furious at what they perceived as cowardice, did not open their ranks to let them pass. Instead, they drew their swords and charged directly into their own retreating mercenaries. Jean Froissart, the great chronicler of the age, recorded the absolute carnage that followed. It was a slaughter on top of a defeat. French steel cut down the very men they had hired to protect them. The lesson written in blood on the fields of Crécy was not that the crossbow was an inferior weapon to the longbow. It was that medieval crossbow warfare was a highly sophisticated, integrated system, and the Pavise shield was not an optional accessory. It was the absolute keystone of the entire doctrine. Remove it, and the weapon's greatest inherent vulnerability, those long exposed seconds of mechanical reloading, swallowed the army whole. The Pavise was, in the most precise historical sense, the external answer to a design flaw that the crossbow could never solve on its own. A portable wooden fortress, a wall you carried with you, cover you built wherever you stood. And on the tragic day the Genoese left theirs behind, history remembered exactly why it mattered.